So let me ask you, are you aware?
Like right between my eyes and
Are you aware who it is that asks the questions when your mind is rambling on? Do you know who you are?
That's a very good question, and the answer is yes. Because finally, particularly if you have these extraordinary experiences that people can report, near-death experiences, mystical experiences.
Who is it that asks the question, who am I? If you become aware that there is something more to you than that rambling mind, you are well on your beginnings.
Have an experience such as this one, you realize that there is a way of knowing, which is I call it direct knowing right now, that allows you to know through the experience. You don't know
to awareness. Then you become aware of being aware. I know it sounds like a bunch of mumbo jumbo double talk, but think about that. Think about being aware.
How reality works. I'm a physicist after all.
That there is something more in you than all those thoughts going through your mind. And do you ever have those thoughts where you're not sure where they came from? How did you think of that? What made you think of that? Now, it's something different when you see a TV show and things pop up in your imagination about the show, or some kind of encounter you had at the red light, or sure, you know where those thoughts came from. But a lot of your thoughts just kind of organically pop into your head. Are you aware of that? Think about being aware, and you'll be on your way. So I've been watching these videos from MIT and Stanford and a bunch of the colleges around. I've been watching these guys lecture, and I watch all kinds of videos that are on physics and fringe science of all kinds, and I'm seeing more and more of those two kind of blurring together, because what's happening is more and more over like the last 10 years, I've noticed several that this has happened to, and it's these professors that are very strong physicalists. In other words, like most of us, we think everything is solid around us, and that's all there is, just the things that we can touch and pick up and see. But there's a whole other world that's not physical, and I'm seeing more and more of these strong physicalists discovering this, and what's happening is they're having these experiences that they it changes their life. It's like near-death experiences, and more of these guys are starting to meditate too. I say guys and gals. These things can happen, and you have this experience that changes your life. And I'm seeing more and more of these professors that this has happened to, and it's changing science. Science is changing right before my eyes. I'm watching more and more of these guys. Mind is the fundamental part. That consciousness has developed everything, and it's just real interesting to watch these things happen. I'll put on a few here. I'll throw some clips in here, and maybe you'll see what I'm talking about. Check it out.
Within seconds, my entire field of view becomes engulfed by dark, swirling smoke. The space around me fractured into 1,000 hexagons and shattered. The speed with which this happened left no time to regret the situation I'd gotten myself into. As I was sucked into a black hole, my last thought was that the dying of the light, I too would die. And I did. I ceased to exist in any recognizable way, shape, or form. No more Christoph, no more ego, no more self, no memories, dreams, desires, hopes, fears. Everything personal was stripped away. Nothing was left but a non-self. This remaining essence wasn't man, woman, child, animal, spirit, or anything else. It didn't want anything, expect anything, think anything, remember anything, dread anything, but it experienced. Did it ever? Okay, then you go on a little bit more about this. This is your...
Hello, Marjorie, and thank you for coming to join me on Beyond Belief today. How are things in Sedona today? You are, it seems to me, a bit of what I would describe as like a unicorn in the scientific world. You know, you're a neuroscientist, you know, who nonetheless believes that neurons are not the be-all and end-all of consciousness and human existence. And you arrived there through what I would describe as kind of a mystical experience. And I wonder if you would mind sharing with the audience what exactly happened.
Sure, I'd be very happy to. So my sister, who had been practicing meditation for a number of years, and I usually laugh because my boyfriend at the time thought she was a bit of a hippie, and she probably was, and he called her a bubblehead occasionally. Nevertheless, was very interested in meditation, and I'd had a little taste of it one time when I was frightened about getting on an airplane to go home from Sedona to Eugene, in fact, and she gave me this very simple mantra, Soham, and she said, this may help you with your anxiety. A plane had just crashed recently, and I was a little bit concerned, and I didn't have anything to lose, so I started repeating those syllables as I was going down the ramp to the plane and got on. And I was amazed that in that moment, all the anxiety went away as I was repeating those syllables. And suddenly the takeoff was not white-knuckled like it usually was, but in fact, I enjoyed looking out the window and seeing the clouds beginning to go by, and I had the most wonderful trip home. So I had a little bit of a taste of meditation. I thought, well, I'm curious. But then a year later, I actually was starting to teach in Virginia, and she invited me to take a meditation retreat with an Indian meditation master. And I was curious, and I was skeptical at the same time. I'm a neuroscientist, and I know that the brain creates our consciousness, and what is meditation anyway? So saying that, I went to the retreat, and the first morning, we were told that during the first meditation, the Swami was going to walk around the room and he was going to initiate everyone there. And the initiation was described as an awakening. Now, I didn't know what that meant, but though I was skeptical, I was curious, and I decided, why not just sit there and see what happens? And when he came around the room and he came to me, I felt his fingers on the bridge of my nose, and it was like right between my eyes. And when I felt that touch, I felt what felt like a current of electricity, like a mini lightning bolt, go from that place between my eyes down to the center of my chest. And it went right to the heart, not the physical heart, but what felt to me like more like a heart than a physical heart had ever been. And from that place, I felt this exquisite sense of love and almost a feeling like golden nectar flowing out through my body and beyond. And words came to mind that were not scientific in any way. They were, I'm home. Mm-hmm. I'm home. My heart is my home.
Wow.
And what's interesting to me is that actually started this complete shift, 180-degree shift in my life, and that I went back the next day to Virginia where I was teaching, and I got up at 5 a.m. and I began meditating. And literally, I've been meditating ever since. And it's because I somehow had the experience in that moment that just beneath the surface of my awareness, there simmered this quiet ecstasy. And I tapped it once, and therefore I knew it was there waiting for me if I could find it again just below that surface. And that started a whole shift in my life.
And I guess what I should say also is that it's not only college professors and that this is happening to. It's happened a whole lot in the medical community. A lot of doctors, nurses, this has happened to. In fact, it's all through society that this is happening to people, but it stands out more when you've watched somebody that's been very, very staunchly a physicalist, and then they start going to an idealist position. And an idealist, our idealism is where consciousness is the primary fundamental thing, and everything else is mental. And that's not to say that physical things don't exist, but the way they exist is different than the way we experience them. When we're experiencing a physical object, science has a very difficult time trying to, like my coffee cup here, trying to determine where the cup starts and ends, and where my body begins or ends, or where the atmosphere, because there's so much empty space in all of it. When you get the right perspective on things, or I should say a different perspective on things, all those atoms are such big empty spaces, and they're all pretty damn similar. The only thing different is the amount of electrons and protons in the atoms. So it's really hard if you try to figure out what matter is and what mass is. Not math, but yeah, math too. It really becomes difficult to put your finger on exactly what it is, and nobody really can figure that out yet. So what is this here? It's a coffee cup. It's also a clump of clay, some way formed into a cup. But at its basis, at its smallest level of pixelation, I guess you could call it, there's atoms, and the atoms can be divided down into quarks and electrons and neutrons, protons, but the bottom line is that atom is just full of a lot of empty space. If you took a person and you removed all the empty space from them, they would be smaller than the eye of a needle. That's a lot of empty space. So what I was saying is that you can see the world as a mental projection and understand that physical things are real. They're just real in a different means. We get these electric signals from our fingertips and goes to our brain that this is something solid. And the electrons of my fingers and the electrons of that coffee cup repel each other. They won't go through each other. And so we get the sensation of it as being a solid object, even though it's well over 90% empty space. What is that? If I'm saying it really exists and it's a mental projection, what I'm trying to get at is that this mental projection is a way of understanding something, and we're having this experience of a solid object, and what really it is something far different. And I don't think we're capable of understanding that fully. But it's a mental projection, and it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It certainly does exist. There is a physical world. what we experience it as a physical world, and when you get down to the fundamental building blocks of it, it's a mental projection. Hard to put into words. You're following what Donald Hoffman's theories are. He speaks of agents, and these agents are agents of consciousness at different levels. And so you have like a single conscious agent that attaches to a second and a third and on. And as each of these attachments happen, a new consciousness is formed. You don't lose the old ones, but you gain new ones because of the construction. So when I asked a while back, are you aware? If you sit down in a quiet space and you ask yourself, who are you and what are you and where are you? You have to wonder who's asking the question. There seems to be more than one side to all this. So that if you take the first step and you become aware that you're aware of something else asking the question, and that something else is you, well, who are you asking the question to then? So you see, it's kind of a jumbled mess of words if you try to speak it. But when you're in these altered states, all that is very clear, and you don't need words. The words just jumble it up, make it messy. But the bottom line is, when you're looking at the quantum physics physicists, especially the particle physicists, and they're trying to describe matter and mass as, they say they're not saying just a vibration, because that's kind of a woo thing, but they do speak of the fields as vibrating or having wavelengths. So I guess you could distinct a vibration as really short wavelengths, and they're speaking of maybe a longer wavelength, maybe. But bottom line is, they're describing the physical universe as something that only comes about when there's a measurement taken. Now, there's all kinds of arguments to what that measurement is, but there's very good arguments that that measurement is consciousness itself. When you see solid objects, you're taking a measurement by seeing them. So that argument's going to play out for another 20 years probably, until the last of the holdouts pass on. You know, they say science moves one funeral at a time. And the younger physicists, they're all on board with understanding that the physical world is a mental world. And that's very difficult for people at my age to come to grips with. But once you understand it, boy, things change. The way you see the world is completely different than when you thought that you were just a physical clump of atoms, and that your consciousness was coming from those atoms, where when you look at it the way that quantum physicists see it, your consciousness is causing those atoms to be there. So the first step is becoming aware that there's a witness to your question, and there's a questioner. So Hoffman describes as these many units of awareness. They attach to each other, and as these particles attach to each other, their consciousness adds together, and although they retain that consciousness that it began with, there's also a new consciousness that has arose from the meaning. Sure, none of that sounds like it makes any sense at all. So I have to think of how to put that. So we come to the question of what are you? And the Eastern traditions would say that the one thing that stays the same is I. Everything that you relate to, you start out is I. That I am a person. I am a father. I am a driver. I am a whatever. It always starts with I, and it always stays with I. The one thing that's always changing is your body. You're always shedding atoms and regaining them, growing new ones and eliminating old ones, and that's why your body doesn't look like it did when you were an infant or when you were a teenager or a young person. It's always changing, and I think it only takes about 3 years to change every molecule in your body. So it's all brand new within every 3 years. But what stays the same is it's the I. And the I is the experience. And so that I cannot be your body, because you shed your body every 3 years. What I'm getting at is the consciousness that is having the experience is the I. If you were to take a second and determine what is your experience at this moment, let's say, can you feel any pain in your body? And focus in on that. If there's anything uncomfortable, focus in on that. Is there any sounds that are is there any sounds that are annoying you? Anything like that, focus in on that. And as you focus in on it, now let's switch to something that feels great. Is there anything in your body that feels wonderful? And focus in on that now. And now realize that when you're focused in on the part that feels good, the part that feels bad goes away. And when you're focused in on the bad, you didn't even realize that there was a part of you that felt good. So this is all just an experience, and it's all just a mental experience. Everything is an experience. And that's all it is.